The devastating war had carved deep, agonizing scars across the entirety of the Pacific, leaving a profound and terrible legacy of destruction, despair, and pervasive fear in its wake. By the early months of 1945, as American forces continued their relentless, seemingly unstoppable advance across islands formerly under staunch Japanese control, a group of dedicated Japanese nurses found themselves witnessing a harsh reality that violently contradicted everything they had been taught to believe. Their rigid training had been absolute and uncompromising. They were to serve the emperor and his soldiers. Yet what they observed firsthand challenged every single foundational belief that had been embedded in their minds. The nurses were stationed near rudimentary makeshift field hospitals. Dark whispers and rumors circulated ceaselessly amongst them, fueled by years of relentless propaganda. American medics, they were told, were merciless and uncivilized, treating only their own men and deliberately leaving enemy children and non-combatant civilians to suffer and perish without aid. The fear and tension were palpable. When a convoy of American soldiers unexpectedly arrived to assist with the overwhelming medical operations, the nurses gathered cautiously at the edges of the compound, their intense curiosity mixed with profound trepidation. They watched, rigid with internal conflict, determined to observe, hoping, perhaps, to confirm that the enemy was indeed as heartless as the propaganda had insisted. The very first sight struck them into utter silence, freezing them where they stood. American medics, who should have embodied cruel vengeance, moved swiftly and with disciplined efficiency. They were carrying stretchers, but not solely for their own wounded soldiers. They carried small children. These were the children of Japanese civilians, innocent victims caught in the brutal crossfire of the conflict, often orphaned, severely wounded, or abandoned in the chaos of retreat. The nurses watched, their hearts pounding against their ribs, as the enemy medics meticulously cleaned, bandaged, and fed these fragile Japanese children first, before attending to the wounds of their own fighting men. Every touch was careful and measured, every interaction gentle despite the language barrier, every action deliberate and profoundly professional. A young nurse, Ako, who had internalized the extreme lessons of fear and hatred most completely, could hardly believe her eyes. She had been trained to expect only cruelty. She saw the enemy as inhuman monsters. Yet here were men she had been taught to despise and fear, kneeling beside tiny figures, calming their desperate cries with patient assurance and offering physical comfort. Her hands, previously so steady while treating soldiers, now trembled violently as she absorbed the scene. Some of her colleagues whispered in disbelief, questioning if this was a cynical trap, a manipulative ploy, or merely a temporary staged display. But the sheer exhausting sincerity in the Americans' consistent gestures left little room for doubt. One small boy, no more than 5 years old, had a deep, infected gash along his arm, and his small body shook uncontrollably with fever. An American medic approached, gently cleaning the wound, speaking soothing, unintelligible words. Ako saw the child's body instantly relax, his eyes closing in utter relief as the soldier adjusted his blankets and offered water. Her mind struggled desperately to reconcile the disparity between the savage enemy she had prepared to face and the powerful, quiet human compassion displayed before her. By the afternoon, an extraordinary measured rhythm had emerged within the chaotic camp. American medics moved systematically, ensuring that every child, every civilian, and every single wounded Japanese soldier received medical attention. No child was left to cry unattended. No parent went without swift, quiet reassurance. The Japanese nurses were particularly struck by the firm restraint and respect exercised toward the wounded Japanese soldiers. These men were treated with strict professional care rather than vengeance or humiliation. Gathering her waning courage, Ako finally approached the American medic leader, offering her cautious help. The medic looked up, smiled warmly, and gestured for her to assist in distributing bandages. She took the final, momentous step, crossing that terrifying invisible line, feeling a strange, intoxicating blend of fear, awe, and a dizzying new understanding of dignity. Her colleagues, hesitant at first, soon joined her, participating under the professional guidance of the Americans. By evening, the nurses were utterly exhausted, yet profoundly changed at their core. They had witnessed acts of mercy that violently contradicted every piece of propaganda they had ever heard. Back in their quarters, Akko scribbled intensely in her journal, trying to capture the shock and the profound moral questions it raised. How could these men who were supposed to be the enemy, the cruel invaders, exhibit such selfless care? Could humanity truly survive, let alone flourish, in the midst of total war? Night fell over the makeshift camp, but the vivid memory of the day's events lingered like a stubborn, persistent flame. The nurses gathered around a small lantern, whispering in hushed, bewildered tones about what they had seen. The initial shock had not yet faded. They had been trained for years to anticipate only cruelty and brutality. Yet every careful touch, every consistent act of kindness, thoroughly contradicted the lessons of fear embedded deep in their minds. Akko could not stop thinking about the children. She remembered one small boy whose cries had pierced her heart, but the American medic's calm, patient hands had soothed him. They had not rushed. They had not scolded. The soldier had whispered reassurances, adjusted the splint meticulously, and smiled with gentle encouragement. Akko had never witnessed such unwavering patience, and it made her question everything she had accepted as undeniable truth. The nurses began to follow the American medics more closely. The next morning, they saw the men distribute food and water with precision, making sure no one went hungry. Children received warm rice and broth, often before the Japanese soldiers still awaiting their own meager rations. Akiko's colleague, Haruko, captured the feeling best when she whispered, "They are teaching us something, I think. Not with words or weapons, but with actions. Perhaps this is how true mercy is taught, not merely learned." As the days passed, the nurses became active participants. They helped clean the wards, prepared blankets, and assisted with feeding. The Americans never forced them. Every gesture of inclusion was gentle, respectful, and deliberate. One afternoon, a small group of injured Japanese soldiers arrived. The nurses held their breath, anticipating harsh treatment, but the Americans treated them with the same unwavering professionalism. The nurses realized that this was not merely an act of charity toward children. It was a fundamental approach to humanity itself. Every life, enemy or ally, deserved care and dignity. If this profound moment of wartime humanity touches you as deeply as it changed these nurses, please pause for a moment to support the channel. Like this video to salute the powerful moral lesson taught by these American medics. Subscribe so you never miss another incredible, moving historical narrative of human morality. By the end of the week, the Japanese nurses had begun to experience a profound transformation. Their rigorous training had emphasized obedience and fear, but what they were witnessing taught empathy, restraint, and moral courage. They started to question the broader understanding of war and national honor. One evening, a Japanese mother approached the nurses carrying her feverish child, whispering thanks. The nurses realized that the Americans' actions had empowered them to act with a new, autonomous kindness. For the first time, they saw themselves as agents of care, rather than mere instruments of a militarized system. Akko reflected on the contrast. The war had taught her fear, but the Americans had shown her a kind of courage rooted in mercy. In their silence, their consistent acts of care, they conveyed a lesson far greater than any propaganda could instill, that true strength could coexist with compassion. As the days turned into weeks, the nurses saw the full scope of the Americans' care. All civilians, injured soldiers, and elderly villagers received attention, food, and warmth. The nurses observed that every act of kindness was accompanied by deliberate, careful restraint. One morning, a severe storm swept across the camp. The American soldiers worked tirelessly to secure the tents and elevate the sick beds. Not a single word of complaint was uttered. Ako's admiration grew. This was discipline tempered with empathy. Weeks later, news spread that the war had officially ended. The Americans continued their disciplined routine of care, never allowing the ending of conflict to diminish their principles. Ako reflected on her journey. She had arrived filled with fear, trained to see the Americans as merciless enemies. But she had witnessed actions that challenged every assumption. Wounded children healed before soldiers, and a relentless commitment to human dignity prevailed. She wrote in her journal, "They have not touched us in ways we feared, yet they have changed us forever. Their mercy is stronger than any weapon." On the day of departure, tearful farewells were exchanged. The nurses realized that their own understanding of war, honor, and humanity had been irrevocably altered. They had learned that the measure of a soldier was not only in his ability to fight, but in his profound capacity to respect life. As the sun set over the Pacific, Ako knew that the war's most astonishing legacy would not be counted in battles or victories, but in the lives spared, the dignity maintained, and the enduring quiet power of human compassion. True courage, they learned, is measured not by what one destroys, but by what one protects. The enemy they had been taught to fear demonstrated a strength greater than any army, the strength to act with compassion in the midst of war.